Welcome to the next installment of how to build a typical color deck. And today we are doing how to build an Abzan deck. It's white, green and black, and the basis of this color combination is that we are here to be last, not here to be the first. While other decks race ahead trying to deal some measly damages, we are here to win. We are building a strategy that will ensure that no one will outlast us. We are here together to get each other out of the graveyard back onto the battlefield with all of our small guys. And people might underestimate them, but as they keep coming back, people will eventually realize that that was our plan all along. This color combination will give us some of the best removal, some of the best recursion, and some of the best ramp because we have green, making us a nightmare for our opponents. Whether you're grinding value through graveyard recursion, shutting down threats with Hatebears, or overwhelming the board with Lifegain synergies, Abzan is always about inevitability. In this video we'll break down the strengths and weaknesses of Abzan and why they are even here, the mindset that we need to play it effectively, how to choose the right commanders with some examples of commanders that are the most popular in their field, and the best win conditions, combos and deck building essentials that you can always use for any Abzan deck. If you want to outlast, outvalue and control the game, Abzan might be your perfect playstyle. So I hope your coffee is warm. Let's dive in. Starting with the purpose of Abzan. Abzan is supposed to be a powerful deck, a grindy deck, one that wins over time, not immediately, and most of the time more of a mid-range deck more than a controlling or aggressive deck. We are here to outlast opponents with recursion. We don't care if we are board whipping because we are the ones board wiping others. And we are not here to be first, we are here to be last. Our main strengths are removal because we have white and black, ramp because we have green, board wipes because we have white and black, recursion because of black, and go white's strategies, believe it or not. Well, believe it or not, we are still Celestian, and that makes us great at go white strategies. Also, the Abzan are all about family, even if it's the dead ones. We do need some build up, that is one of our weaknesses, so we might take some time to get going. We are not the most aggressive. We can struggle against combo decks because we don't really have interaction that counters other people's strategies. And our mana base will get a little bit harder because we have 3 colors, even though we have green, which will give us enough ramp. So if you play it right, you will get the mana you need. Our mindset should be to go hard on removal and board wipes, because you will outlast your opponents. It doesn't matter if you wipe your own board sometimes. The longer you go, the stronger you are. So if you need to get going a bit later, that will be fine. Just make sure that you still have some fuel in the tank. If you don't have the fuel, this rule doesn't count anymore. Also capitalize on your board presence. If you are ahead on board, make sure that you have a way to capitalize on that. If you probably don't have a way to capitalize on your board presence, don't make it. Also, know when to strike. If you do see the opportunity to maybe kill an opponent or have something useful from attacking, then you shoot. But if you lose too much, you shouldn't, obviously. One other way to think about this is if you have recursion in hand and you have some ways to get your creatures back, you might attack. But usually you want to be mindful of losing your stuff too often. The most popular mechanic that Abzan works around is Lifegain, and the most popular commander for it is actually 2 commanders, Frodo, adventurous Hobbit, and Sam, loyal Attendant. Frodo is our black and white commander. He of course partners with Sam, that's why you can have 2 commanders. And his ability says, whenever it attacks, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, the ring tempts you. Then, if Frodo is your ring bearer and the ring has tempted you 2 or more times this game, you draw a card as well. So you want to attack in with your ring bearer anyways, so that's why Frodo works really well with that. And your partner Sam is all about food. So at the beginning of combat on your turn, you create a food token, and activated abilities of foods you control cost 1 less to activate. So it kind of feels like these two shouldn't be working together that well. But on the other side, Frodo only works if Sam has fed him. That's basically the flavor here. So food will of course give you 3 or more life in a turn. And then Frodo can have himself tempt you. Or, well, the ring tempts you. So what you want to do in this deck is basically combo out with some food strategies, create massive amounts of tokens, and then kill your opponents with Mirkwood Pets, which I would say is one of the best finishers for Abzan decks. The next strategy is Lands Matter, where the Necrobloom is our main commander. The Necrobloom loves lands, mostly because he doesn't care if they are removed into the graveyard or wherever they go, and that's perfect for our color combination. So the main ability of the Necrobloom is Landfall. So whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 0/1 plant. And that's not all, because if you control 7 or more lands with different names, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token instead. And those 2/2s will have to win you the game. But I think really the main ability here is that lands in your graveyard have Dredge 2. So you may return a land card from your graveyard to your hand and mill 2 cards instead of drawing a card. So whenever you draw a card, you can also choose to mill 2 cards and return a land. And milling cards, of course, is a great thing to do for you, because you can then return those cards back to the battlefield and outlast your opponents. So I think this is a classical Abzan strategy in this manner. Also, you are very capable of getting a bunch of lands out onto the battlefield, as you have the green color, of course. I think main cards to include here are cards like the Gitrog Monster that really work well with these strategies, and basically any landfall cards that will help you win the game through all of those lands entering the battlefield again. Also, never forget to include Field of the Dead in this deck, because it's basically a second commander on a land. As any Celestian deck should be, we have some strengths in Enchantress decks here too. Anikthea, Hand of Erebos, is our main commander in Abzan for this strategy. She says other enchantment creatures you control have menace. Not that strong yet, but whenever Anikthea enters the battlefield or attacks, you exile up to 1 target non-aura enchantment card from your graveyard. Then you create a token that's a copy of that card, except it's a 3/3 black zombie creature token in addition to its types. So this isn't really an Enchantress commander herself, but she does help you return cards that are non-aura enchantments from your graveyard onto the battlefield as creatures. So that does help, and then you will have a bunch of Enchantress cards in your deck, of course, that can then help you draw all of your deck. That's basically what you want to do. You don't mind discarding cards from having a full grip, because then you will be able to get them back with Anikthea again. So that's one way to not care about having a full grip. Then we have 2 Infect commanders. We have Ixhel, Scion of Atraxa, which is more of a toxic commander, honestly. So what Ixhel is I don't know, she says corrupted. So at the beginning of your end step, each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters exiles the top card of their library face down. You may look at and play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So what happens is you need to get your opponents corrupted, and then you can start stealing their cards. So basically you do want to win with poison counters or infect or whatever, and then you will win the game through having them give you their cards. So it's a bit of a, let's say, twisted strategy here, because you have multiple things that you want to do at once, but I think it is a fun ability still, even if it is overused, and this is at least a very creative way to do it. But we have another Infect commander, and that is Vishgraz, the Doomhive. And I think this one is more flavorful, but maybe less strong. Vishgraz, if you say it like that, says when it enters the battlefield, create 3 1/1 Phyrexian Might artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1, meaning that players dealt combat damage by those creatures will also get a poison counter, and they have this creature can't block, so you can't even block with your tokens, but you wanted to attack with them anyways because you need those poison counters out. And then Vishgraz gets +1/+1 for each poison counters your opponents have. So he can grow into a really big monster because all of your opponents will count towards Vishgraz growing. But one strong creature doesn't make an army. And luckily there are multiple ways to play these commanders, because another way is just in a typo deck where you are playing with Phyrexians. Both are Phyrexians. Vishgraz also helps you make Phyrexian tokens, at least 3. And Ixhel is also just a Phyrexian that will help you draw cards, so that's also fine. And of course they both work with the toxic mechanic, which is something that Phyrexians love to do. So those are the things that basically make them a great commander for a Phyrexian deck. But other than that, I think there are still better choices for this creature type. But if you find it fun to get in with toxic creatures and you will have fun with that, I think these commanders will be great for you to make you feel like you are playing a Phyrexian deck. Where before we have had lands matter as a type, now we have Landfall, and it's a little different but not too much. Landfall is more about getting lands onto the battlefield, not really about caring about the lands themselves. So it's a strange little change, but in here Thalia and the Gitrog monster are more popular because they will help you get those lands onto the battlefield more than anything else. So Thalia and the Gitrog monster say you may play an additional land on each of your turns. Creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter tapped, so not really part of this in any way. But also whenever Thalia and the Gitrog monster attacks, I find it weird, but okay, attacks, sacrifice a creature or land, and mostly you want to sacrifice lands this way, then draw a card. And then when you sacrifice those lands, of course, you want ways to get them back, so you will have those landfall trigger abilities again and again and again. We have some niche techniques as well, like Toughness Matters. Doran the Siege Tower is basically the OG, I think, Toughness Matter commander. Just Abzan in its colors and says simply each creature assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. Each creature means that your opponents will have to adhere to this too, so you do knock down some decks, like high power decks, in many ways. Doran himself is also a 5/5 for just 3 mana, so that's a great tree, actually. Get it? I hope you do. Other than that, Doran loves other trees because those trees also have big toughnesses. And I think this is just a really fun way to win. Winning with creatures that are 3 7s, 4 10s, 2 10s that usually don't really work on their own, but in this case can become so overpowered. You do need some way to get in, trample, or maybe some evasion if you can find it, other than trample of course. But yeah, I think this is a really fun archetype, and if you can make it work, I have all the more respect for you. My personal favorite for sagas is Narci, Fable Singer. singer, and them being Abzan is great for this video because they get to be in it. Narci says whenever you sacrifice an enchantment, draw a card. And of course sagas will be sacrificed once you are done with them. And Narci also says whenever the final chapter ability of a saga you control resolves, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is that saga's mana value. Why I like this as a saga commander is, well, the other one is basically there because he has all 5 colors. But Narci wants you to finish those sagas, and most other ones really want you to play around with them, never really finishing them, and that just feels wrong to me. In this case, you want them to be finished, you want the stories to be told, and you want them to end. And that's my philosophy with stories as well. You need to finish your stories. Don't leave us with a cliffhanger. That's what Narci does. Narci brings us closure for the stories that were never finished. Graveyard synergies have always been Golgari, and Karador makes sure that Abzan gets a piece too. Karador, I remember many people playing him in older times. A really big commander, you would say at first, but gets cheaper. 1 mana cheaper, in fact, for each creature card in your graveyard. So you want to mill yourself often enough, have a bunch of creature cards in your graveyard, and then you can very easily play Karador. Also, once during each of your turns, you may cast a creature spell from your graveyard. It's that simple. Mostly what you want to do is make Karador really cheap, so you need a bunch of mill effects, and then get big creatures back because you only can get 1 every time. So it's a little bit different from Muldrotha, which can get back multiple things at once, at one turn. But Karador really wants you to work with creatures, which I think is a fun rule that you need to adhere to in deck building, and can make for a great deck that is all about toolboxing your opponents. Thalia and the Gitrog monster are back for another theme that they work with well, which is Hatebears, and in this case it's basically a different commander that we are looking at, because now the most important ability is that creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control will enter the battlefield tab. Well, that's kind of a lie, because the most important ability is those colors. White mostly, black a little bit, and green is good for your personal growth, let's say ramp. But also, so you have some cards like other Thalias that will make non-creature spells more expensive to cast, but also green has Collector's Oath, which is about stopping abilities of artifacts to be activated, and that can be a strong way to stop your opponents from ramping at all. Definitely, since you will still be ramping as you have green. I thought this was one of the most popular creature types, but Zeppelings. Ghave, or Ghave, which I prefer to say, Guru of Spores, is a pretty big commander, I would say. 5 mana is the edge of what I would play as a commander. But this one does enter as a really big creature, so it's a 5/5. Honestly, that's just fair, but it enters as a 5/5. All existing from +1 counters. Then for 1 mana you can remove a +1 counter to create a 1/1 Zeppelin, and for 1 mana you can sacrifice a creature again to put a +1 counter on target creature. So you can grow Ghave and then again get a 1/1, so this is the way that you combo off with this commander. Make sure that you have multiple +1 counters entering on him, and you will infinitely grow him as long as you have the mana. Of course, we are green, so we have the mana, but there are multiple ways to win the game with a combo here too. And one of the more recent themes that we have gotten is mutating, and Nethroi is a great commander for this. I think it is an interesting one. It's not really about, well, the interesting part is not really about mutating itself, But Nethroi says whenever this creature mutates, so it does mutate, return any number of target creature cards with a total power 10 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. And the most interesting part here to me is the fact that you can get a lot of creatures back if you build this deck in the right manner. If you make sure that there are a bunch of 0-powered creatures in your graveyard, you can get them back for, let's say, basically free. So I think this is a fun way to go about it, and of course you still want to mutate your commander multiple times, so you have the subset of great cards that mutate that you need in this deck too. So how do you choose your Abzan commander? I would say first choose between combat damage, resource advantage or combo ways to win, because there are multiple ways to win in this color combination. Also, you will be mid-range, but do you want to be a disruptive mid-range deck where you stop your opponents from playing, or do you want to be a resilient mid-range deck where you start building your graveyard and your board state and then make sure that you keep returning after your opponents have done their thing being aggressive? My personal favorite finishers for Abzan are first of all Mirkwood Bats. I've talked about it a little bit before in this video. It's a big creature, 4 mana, but I love its ability. It's so simple. Whenever you create or sacrifice a token, each opponent loses 1 life. So great with the food synergies, but there are multiple tokens in Abzan that can really help you win the game here. Definitely since you love to sacrifice them. Another great finisher for this color combination is Sanguine Bond, which is more of a combo piece usually, but it says whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life, and there are a lot of life gain synergies in Abzan, so I think this fits here. We have Scoot Swarm, which is all about the landfall that many decks play around with in Abzan, and Scoot Swarm of course is the famous landfall finisher where it says whenever a land you control, create a 1/1 or a copy of Scoot Swarm if you have 6 or more lands. So you can definitely go out in an expensive exponential way with this. And Elas Il Kor, who I'm still wondering about who this is really. We've seen them once and now they are dead, I think. But the card is what we care about today. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. So there's the life gain again. But more importantly, whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. And you want a bunch of creatures to die in this color combination. For famous Abzan combos, we have first off a Lands Matter Landfall combination, where we have the Gitrog monster and the Necrobloom working together as 2 fan favorite commanders. So the Gitrog monster says that whenever 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you draw a card. So that means just discard a land and you will trigger the Gitrog monster. Then if you have the Necrobloom out next to it, it will say land cards in your graveyard have dredge 2. So you may return a land card from your graveyard to your hand and mill 2 cards instead of drawing a card. As the Gitrog monster helps you draw a card, you will dredge 2 and then you should be able to repeat this process and infinitely self-mill yourself and almost infinitely discard until you have nothing in your hand. And you love that, don't you? No, of course you want something to win you the game because this all happens. But other than that, it's still a pretty fun way to lose the game. Then Miracle, which we haven't talked about as a commander, but is a great combo piece because it helps you return a creature as an enchantment. So for example, by pairing this with Devoted Druid, which is a part of many combos, we can have infinite green mana if we want to. So Devoted Druid says, tap it to add green mana and put a -1 counter on Devoted Druid to untap Devoted Druid. So you can do this twice and then Devoted Druid will die. And when it dies, that means you can exile it, and if you do, you create a token that's a copy of it but it's an enchantment and loses the creature type. So now you have an enchantment that you can infinitely tap, because you can infinitely put -1 counters on an enchantment and it will not die. Another way to break Miracle is with Barenton Medic, which works the same way because you put a -1 counter on it to untap it. And with this combination you don't have infinite green mana, which is arguably better, but it also says, instead it says, prevent the next 1 damage that would be dealt to target creature or player this turn. So in this case you will be able to prevent all damage that will be dealt to you or permanents you control. So they are basically safe. Next up, we are building the core of an Abzan deck. And what we need most are great lands, so let's build our mana base first. Aside from of course basics and the other cards that are always good, I think we should put some extra emphasis on, for one, the triomes and lands that give you all 3 mana of course, because we are a 3-color deck and triomes will be extra good in those. So the ones that fit you should use, like Sandstep Citadel, which gives all 3 and is about the Abzan. So it does have that beautiful flavor, that which endures survives, and that's all we are about today. Indata Triome 2, which also has great flavor. These lowlands were formed thousands of years ago by the behemoth in death. Its final footsteps before vanishing out into the sea. That's perfect for Abzan because they are all about death and life that springs forth from it. Other than those, I think we should use jewel lands that are also basic lands, or also have basic land types, like Overgrown Tomb, which is a swamp and a forest, as well as it entering untapped if you needed to, if you paid it 2 life of course. Same goes of course for Temple Garden and Godless Shrine. And I think another type of land that is great here is the one where you sacrifice 1 immediately to get a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped, like Terramorphic Expanse or Evolving Wilds, because we have so many landfall strategies that work well in Abzan. For ramp, for one, we have Green's package with Cultivate, Farseek and Rampant Growth. Those will always be good in green decks, so definitely get yourself some of those if you are not sure which green deck you want to build. An extra one is Insidious Roots, which is perfect here because it's 2 mana for an enchantment that says creature tokens will have the ability to tap for 1 mana of any color. And as you will be playing with a bunch of creature tokens in this color combination, this gives yourself extra power, or gives the card extra power. But also, whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, which Abzan can definitely do, create a 0/1 green plant creature token, put a +1 counter on each plant you control, and then those plants can also be tapped for mana of any color. Removal, another one of our strongest strengths, is great here because we have Golgari and we have Orzhov in our color combination. Golgari gives us, for example, Assassin's Trophy, just 2 mana to destroy target permanent an opponent controls. They may look for a basic land, but that's a price we are willing to pay for such a quick removal that hits anything. Same goes for Anguished Unmaking, which is 3 mana, so a little bit less quick, but exile target non-land permanent, you lose 3 life. We don't really care about those 3 life for that exile effect, we love to pay it. Then we have Mortify, again in Orzhov, destroy target creature or enchantment, really effective, not really expensive for your wallet, so a great option to pick up in any case. And I think same goes for Putrefy, 3 mana to destroy target artifact or creature, and it can't be regenerated if that sometimes comes into play. But we have great removal all around, so you should be able to build the best deck removal wise. Board wipes, we are not the strongest color combination, I think that one goes to Mardu, but we still have some strong contenders. And we have some synergies that work well with getting board whipping. So for example, Toxic Deluge is a great one, 3 mana to pay X life. We don't really care about paying life because we have that much life gain too. Then all creatures get -X, where X is the amount of life you paid. until end of turn. Another one, Damn, 2 mana to destroy target creature. The creature can be regenerated, but also can be overloaded to remove target and instead replace it with each. So each creature. Also a great one, Dusk to Dawn, because it says destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, and oftentimes we don't really have a large amount of power, so we can destroy all creatures from our opponents and have some creatures left for ourselves. Then Dawn is the aftermath part, which you can play after you play Dusk. It says return all creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand, and because of the same reasons you will be able to get a bunch of creatures back to your hand with this. Another one, June Blast, is here because it is an Abzan but doesn't really work with the strategy weirdly. It says choose up to 1 creature, destroy the rest. So you will be the only one with the creature left. Still strong, but really expensive, 7 mana, so not my favorite, but I think should be mentioned here because it's pretty good if you can get it off. And Culling Ritual, which seems like a weird one because it destroys each non-net permanent with mana value 2 or less, and we will have a bunch of those. But we don't care because we will get a bunch of mana from them because of this. And that should help us win the game in this color combination. It says for each permanent destroyed this way, so by Culling Ritual, you will get either a black or a green mana. So you will have a bunch of colored mana that you should be able to use to win the game. You have pretty good card draw with black, so you should be able to. Speaking about card advantage, that's what we're talking about now. Skull Clamp is great here, 1 mana equipment, that's prime already. But says equip 1 and then a creature will get 1 toughness less, and then whenever equipped creature dies you draw 2 cards. So with a bunch of tokens you will be able to draw 2 cards for 1 mana every time. This should help you combo off into a late game oftentimes. Welcoming Vampire, also great for decks where you play a bunch of small creatures, because it says whenever 1 or more other creatures with power 2 or less enter the battlefield, draw a card once each turn. Aladamri Skull I put in most Selesnya decks. It says search your library for a creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, shuffle your library. Simple as that, look for a creature and then you will be able to play a creature, hopefully with a sort of tool on top of it, where you perhaps use it to destroy another target creature or wipe the board or win the game. And last but not least, I think a great mention goes out to Moldavine, the only black one in this card draw section. Weird, but it's 5 mana and Golgari colors, so 3 mana and Golgari colors for 5 mana total. An enchantment that says whenever a creature you control dies, you gain a life. We love Lifegain in this color combination, and then you draw a card. Drawing cards, of course, is the most important part here, usually, but I think it's great that you will get something from all of your creatures dying, and then you outlast your opponents because you have been drawing cards. As you have a bunch of board wipes and you are planning on destroying your own creatures anyways, I think this is a great way to draw cards in your decks. And for recursion, I have 2 that work extra well in this color combination. I don't usually put in this theme, but these should be mentioned. Airy Ultimatum is the ultimatum for this 3 color combination, and those should be really strong. This one definitely is. So 2 white, 2 green and 3 black to return any number of permanent cards with different names from your graveyard to the battlefield. In Commander, if you don't know, that means you can return any number of permanent cards basically from the graveyard to the battlefield, and you should win the game that way. That's how ultimatums work. Other one that I wanted to mention is Life from the Loam. Definitely a great one, bit expensive but great. 2 mana for a sorcery to return up to 3 land cards from your graveyard to your hand. Then you can dredge this card, so if you would draw a card you may mill 3 cards instead, and if you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. You love milling cards, you love getting lands back into your hand, and you love getting them back into the graveyard in many of the Abzan decks that exist. Now some playstyle tips. 1. Use your removal aggressively. You have a bunch of it, so you should use it. You have the best access to removal as well, so never let key threats stick around. This is your task. Also board wipes, they are your friend. Abzan loves recovering from board wipes and they are better at it than most decks. So make sure you have some way to capitalize on all of those creatures dying or a way to sacrifice them for some value. And then board wipe your friends so that board wipes will be your last friend. Play the long game, your deck should thrive the longer the match goes. So make plays that extend your staying power or make sure that the field is leveled. Identify the biggest threat. You have the tools to stop those threats, but you have to use them wisely still. Lean into recursion. Even if you aren't a recursion deck per se, you have many ways in which a bunch of creatures will enter the graveyard. This will happen in Abzan, so make sure that you have at least a great package of recursion in all of your decks. Know when to pivot. You can shift between control, mid-range and combo strategies sometimes. So make sure you have multiple ways to win the game, because they can go long. Depending on the board state, make sure you adapt as needed. Also, last but not least, time your win condition well. Whether it will be combat damage, a value grind or an infinite combo, make sure to strike when the moment is right. You can wait around a bit with your Lifegain and your recursion, but make sure that when you do use your win condition, you will be able to actually win the game. I mean, obvious. And that was it for this video. I want to thank you for watching. Please make sure you subscribe, because I think only 5% of you are. So basically, if you are looking at yourself right now and you are subscribed, then you are one of the precious 5%. And if you aren't yet, you have the opportunity to be the top 5% at something. And that isn't really easy to do usually. And this really is easy. So with that, I want to leave you with one last closing note, that if you love resilience, control and power over time, then Abzan is definitely your perfect playstyle. But if you don't for some reason and you are here, let me know what other types of color combinations you'd like to hear about next. Thank you for watching. Bye.